Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, dear judges, dear audience, dear opponent team. The proposition decided to bring in our today's debate two main arguments. First of them I will develop in my speech, and the second argument will be carried out by the second speaker of the proposition. First of all, I would like to begin my speech by defining the key terms of our today's debate. The feminist movement, also known as the women's movement, women's liberation, or women's league, refers to a series of campaigns for reforms on issues such as reproductive rights, domestic violence, maternity leave, equal pay, women's suffrage, sexual harassment, and sexual violence. It gained popularity and influence in the 20th century, and its main focal point is achieving gender equality and respect for the dignity of women. Pornography or porn is the explicit portrayal of sexual subject matter for the purposes of sexual arousal and erotic satisfaction. Well, the 20th century offered grounds for a very interesting to new and somehow revolutionary phenomenon. We're speaking about pornography and women's movement, women's liberation. After centuries of oppression, male dominance, and sexist views, women of the 20th century burst out and started to fight for their rights and to be treated on the same as men were treated. This was also a catalyst for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which did not recognize people's sex as a criterion for discrimination. Women had obtained the same right as men, including that of freedom of speech and expression and the right to protect against violence and discrimination. Meanwhile, mass communication devices and means of entertainment forms, including cinematography and internet, spread all over the globe. The main idea is that pornography, which was before somehow presented and depicted in literature or photography, and that was, well, a private subject, more like a taboo, began to be seen as a completely new industry. The reason why we're having today this debate is because the status quo is completely inadequate. Well, I'll pass to the two arguments that proposition decided to bring today. First of them,
why is it illegitimate for a woman to choose to partake in pornography? Why is it not an expression of feminists achieving sexual emancipation for women? Because
in pornography, women are often exposed to violence, and this is detrimental for their health and to their rights. The proposition's first argument is pornography encourages sexism and is a direct threat to the dignity and security of women. And this I'll develop in my speech. The second argument is pornography is a phenomenon with alarming consequences which require immediate actions to be taken, and this will be explained by the second speaker of the proposition. Well, to begin with, the feminist movement, regardless of further philosophies or ideas, has sought to fight for and defend female dignity. Even though pornography is accessible both to men and women, the statistic presents that 72% of viewers are men, while only only 28% of them are women. Porn producers and people that work in that industry are aware of this fact, so that's why they focus their main target to fulfill and satisfy man's desires and conditions, which is often humiliating for women. What has been fought by the feminist What has been fought by the feminist movement for over a century is basically cancelled along with the rise of pornography, mainly extreme one. Women are increasingly perceived as objects, as mere sexual partners whose only right and duty is to fulfill the man or man's desires. Council of Europe Rapporteur Mendes Boda says in a final resolution, the wide and repeated exposure to violent pornography in which women are portrayed as disposable and interchangeable objects existing only for the sexual pleasure of men has a dehumanizing effect, including a negative effect on the sexual relationship of women and men in real life. For example, both private consensual sex and rapes are sometimes filmed on mobile phones and put on the internet without the women's consent, violating the victim's right to privacy. Violent pornography thus not only poses a threat to women's dignity, but also to their rights, in particular their right to live their lives free of sexual violence. Not only does pornography threaten to women's dignity, but also it generates a state of increased tolerance from their part. They are usually, and the man's desire are increasingly to the next high that are, and their desire are often most obscene and sometimes more intolerant. A study conducted by BBC Radio 1 in association with Portland Cleaning found that heavy porn visitors, 4 out of 5 watched erotic content online for 10 hours a week, were more likely to indulge in problematic and compulsive behavior. A feminist blogger, Sadie Doyle, told to New York Magazine that I think sometimes it's much more harder for women to say, I'm not into that, or please, I don't want to do that, let's do something else, than to say, sure. That's why pornography increases the state of tolerance that women are obliged to accept. Also, it would be naive or cynical to consider pornography as a form of entertainment like any other, as it affects the perception of women and sexual relationship in a society and the standards of what is considered acceptable, not only in the private sphere, but society at large, states Michael Stuhlgold's European Court of Human Rights rapporteur. Also, the images contained in violent and extreme pornography, which often portray women as victims of violence for the purpose of viewers' sexual arousal, are degrading and harmful to women's dignity and their status in society. These images also put at stake the personal safety and physical integrity of women, who may become victims of the violent attacks by perpetrators who imitate what they have seen. In addition, by being accessible to anybody, they are particularly harmful for a balanced development of children. This being said, and taking into consideration the second argument, which will be explained later on, the proposition begs you to propose the motion.
We had 2 essential harms coming out of Moldova's case thus far. The first was that extremely violent pornography, which doesn't involve the consent of women, which involves the abuse of women, is bad and shouldn't be allowed. South Africa agrees with that. We also think that the sort of pornography that they were speaking about is incredibly fringe pornography. It's not the majority of pornography. Most people don't enjoy anything beyond heterosexual, consensual sex, and that's what most pornography reflects. More than that, the sort of pornography that they were alluding to, where women are abused, where women don't give their consent to have that information portrayed on the internet, that is illegal under the status quo, and we don't think it falls within the realms of this debate. Secondly, we had this line coming out that pornography essentially causes sexism. It causes men to become more extreme in how they treat women. It causes men to further objectify women. And we had the case study of men who watch 10 hours of straight pornography were more likely to act on sort of irrational desires with regards to how they would treat men. First of all, there is no correlation between states which allow pornography and states which abuse women's rights. In fact, Afghanistan is one of the few countries in the world that has a complete enforced ban on pornography, and they have some of the worst women's rights abuses in the world. Contrast that with South California, ironically the mecca of porn production, and also the founding place of the feminist movement. The correlation doesn't exist. We think that the sort of men who would watch pornography for 10 hours straight, perhaps as individuals, are some sort of problem, but it's not because of the pornography. That's a reflection of underlying issues. Having dealt with my explicit rebuttal, we need to see if this debate is about, does a ban enshrine women's rights, and does it allow the feminist movement to continue to exist in the future, to continue to fight for women's rights. These are the grounds upon which South Africa clashes with Moldova. We think that this debate is normative and we need a framework for when the feminist movement should act. And we believe there's only 3 situations where this is true. When such an action furthers the goals of propagating choice and opportunity for all women. Secondly, when such an action ensures the strengthening and progression of the feminist movement in the future. And thirdly, when such an action protects women from the sort of explicit harms Moldova was speaking about. South Africa will prove to you that a ban, does not fulfill any of these criteria. Through my points of, first of all, choice, and why acting in pornography is a legitimate choice for women, and therefore an expression of feminist ideals, and therefore enshrining dignity, which Moldova cared about. And secondly, that the stagnation of the feminist movement is what will occur if we ban pornography, because they haven't actually analyzed the feminist movement thus far. My second speaker, Saul, is going to be speaking about that assuming but not conceding such a ban weren't grossly ideologically illegitimate, it would cause the harms Moldova are worried about, with his first point of the creation of an unregulated market, and secondly, how we economically enshackle women who were previously employed in porn. My first point of choice is going to be proof to you that a ban on porn is an attack on a legitimate choice for women and therefore legitimate expression of feminist ideals. We're speaking about the choice of women to take ownership of their own bodies and do with it what they see most beneficial. First of all, society considers choice to be nigh and sacrosanct. This is especially true of the feminist movement, and this is especially true when we're speaking about the right to bodily integrity, the sort of sexual emancipation of women. Bodily integrity is essentially the fact that we afford all human beings the right to control over their own bodies, because there is an inextricable link between your body and your identity. This link is perhaps most powerfully evident when it doesn't exist. That's why transgender individuals suffer such massive psychological harm, because they don't think their body and identity are aligned. The point is, control over your body is incredibly important, and it's incredibly important to dignity in a moment. This is recognized internationally, and there are very few limitations on the right to bodily integrity, and only in extreme situations where it can be proven that the individual is not rational, when the individual will irreversibly harm themselves, and when the individual will harm others. This isn't true of acting in pornography. First of all, in rationality, we believe it's rational for women to act in porn, whether that be in a studio or filming themselves and their husband and putting it on the internet, because that's a legitimate expression of your own sexual identity as you choose to define it. Secondly, it's an economically sound choice. The average salary for women in Spain is 12,460 euros. The average salary for Spanish women in pornography is 2,500 euros. They're making a good economic decision. It's rational. Secondly, in terms of irreversible harms, the dangers of sex are lessened when you're having sex in a porn studio. Why? Because studio directors are incentivized to educate and empower their actors or actresses to be safe, to keep healthy, because that's good business when your business is sex. You don't want STIs. I will get to you, I'm so sorry. What we see that this is the evidence of this is the fact that you have to wear condoms when making a porn movie in South California. You have to speak to a psychologist in Holland when you're making porn industries. They look after their actors and actresses. And Moldova's concerns about what harms do occur in legitimate porn studios, that's an argument for greater regulation. We don't believe these harms exist, but if they do, we shouldn't ban it. That's not going to solve them. Finally, in terms of the negative impact on others, that simply doesn't happen. We're talking about individuals, mature adults making decisions for themselves and about themselves. So what we see as a conclusion, porn and the choice to partake in it is in fact a paragonical expression of the feminist ideals Moldova is so proud of. Ma'am?
Are you completely sure of the fact that no other factors alter women's decision to engage into the porn industry?
No, I'm not 100% sure of every woman's incentives as to why she should partake in the porn industry. What I'm saying is that the vast majority of women are making a rational choice which doesn't harm them, doesn't harm anyone around them, and therefore we should be respected. Extreme cases where individuals are making bad decisions are very different to a ban on an industry in its entirety. Choice is legitimate. The choice to partake in porn is legitimate. Let's talk about why their model would undermine the feminist movement itself. Me proving to you that seeking a ban, is my second point to positive matter, would split the feminist movement, rob them of momentum, polarize allies against them, and empower people whose ideals are contrary to those of the feminist movement. First point, it's a fact that the feminist movement is a minority group. They therefore don't have the sort of political or economic resources compared to other political lobbies in most of the Western world, such as big business, such as big porn, which is going to be relevant later in my point. The point is, though, that the feminist movement has to leverage their influence along with that of their allies against pressure points in society in order to effectively achieve what they wish. Pressure points being those issues that everyone in society can agree have to be solved. The feminist movement has only ever achieved meaningful success when it has successfully identified allies and these pressure points. The obvious example is first wave feminism, which Moldova are incredibly proud of, and so are South Africa. What happened is that the feminist movement correctly identified that they could align themselves with everyday women, with liberal black movements, but most importantly, within themselves. That's why we got the emancipation of women under the Civil Rights Act of 1968. When they failed to do this was in the 1980s, in the porn wars, when what Moldova suggested was actually done. We had to split down the feminist movement because some supported porn, some didn't. What happened? These extremists sought to ban. In response, the massively wealthy pro-porn lobby was created to use their economic and political influence to organize rallies, pro-choice advertisements, and political power behind them. In response to this, the feminists had to get in bed with evangelicals because they were the only people who had the inclination or the economic capacity to deal with the pro-porn lobby. Finally, they polarized society against them because most liberals no longer supported them because liberals are pro-choice. And they saw this new stance by feminists as a betrayal of shared ideals between liberals and the feminist movement. But finally, women in society didn't go for it because they're always going to support the status quo. It's easier. But more than that, most women are pro-choice because that's what they want for themselves. And women who seek to act in the porn industry, they want that option. Finally, men didn't support it. The point is, it didn't work then. It won't work now because society has moved further left. Society is more liberal. Society is going to react even worse if the feminist movement sort of ban pornography now. It doesn't protect choice, and it doesn't further the propagation of the feminist movement, and therefore it doesn't meet our first two criteria.
What South Africa is actually ignoring today is the fact that we live in a world that is not actually abiding by so idealistic values and so idealistic principles, as in only women that want engage into pornography, and that pornography is actually any kind of form of recreation, and thus it must be treated like any kind of form of cinematography, like a new genre of other types of movies. Well, that is exactly why the proposition has brought the case into discussion today, because it has been demonstrated that the adverse effects of pornography are alarming and are on the rise right now as we speak, and we have to deal with it until it is not too late, and we shall not have to and we could put a ban right now in order to stop further consequences from occurring, rather than actually dealing with the consequences later when they are already enforced. So first, I will have two main points of rebuttal which actually coincide with the arguments that South Africa has brought us with. And the first one is about the legitimate decision of women who engage into pornography, as we are addressing specifically women, as the men have not been brought to discussion as a main problem factor in this debate. So first of all, as I have the first speaker has agreed during the point of information, not all women it is not confirmed that women do not have their decision altered when they engage into pornography. And as an example for this, we could use we could cite a former main actress of the porn industry, which is Linda Lovelace, and I do not remember right now her real name. But the fact is that she has stated, after she has retired from the porn industry, she who has come through from a very nefarious medium, states that people who are watching porn movies with me right now are actually watching me being raped, because all the time I had a gun to my head, and my husband was a porn producer, no thank you, that was actually forcing me to act in these films, and it was not her consensual sex which has happened. Furthermore, we are talking about films that have been movies that have been recorded and posted on the internet and into a widespread flow without the consensus of women. And if the opposition team fails to address that issue, then it is actually neglecting the core of the problem. If pornography focused mainly on soft porn and on consensual sex, on stuff that wouldn't impose such a threat to the dignity of women and actually to their bodily integrity, then the proposition would still not be debating the case today, because actually soft porn is what entrains hardcore porn, and that is, and I shall get upon that in my further speech. My second point of rebuttal, and I would also like to add about the fact that not only adult women engage into porn, and it is often teenagers, people that are girls that are less than 18 years old, that are tricked into filming themselves into the porn industry because of the need of money, and that is actually very easy to achieve once porn producers have the resources and all the advertising methods in order to attract them into the industry. No, thank you. And my second point of rebuttal is the stagnation of the feminist movement. Well, I would like to point out that feminists actually have two different tendencies. There are feminists there is a small minority of feminists who may support the rights of pornography, and they may state that this is actually the freedom of speech of women, and they actually refer only to soft porn, whilst they are ignoring the adverse effects. But actually, a minority of women that actually supports female pornography and female maltretation in pornography, which is actually what we are seeing right now in pornography, is a minority and should not determine the way the majority has to be seen. Because once videos and images and visual means are much more explicit and much more easy to understand for the masses, and thus a minority usually determines how the majority is seen. So if me, for example, if I don't share, and it's actually the case of a greater majority of women, if I do not share the exact same views as the women that decide to film themselves in porn movies, my perception of the world's perception upon me does not have to be affected by the way that these women have decided to express their own sexuality. And now moving on to my case. First of all, as you might be aware, it has been proven that intense and intense use of pornography, I shall get to you in a moment, the intense use of pornography accompanied by repeated climax or arousal passes into a form of addiction. And this is caused by the fact that the body usually secretes different pleasure-inducing hormones, namely oxytocin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. And the body gets used to their systematic use. Thus, the body seeks to replenish the feeling, and persons usually, people, and I'm not talking about only those addicts who watch porn for 10 hours straight, but I'm talking for people, or even for about children who have been into their first contact with pornography, and curiosity has triggered this repeated use, and it actually passes into a form of addiction. Yes?
The feminist movement has historically always argued for the improvement of industries and to allow them to include women to the benefit of that industry. Why are they now changing their stance, and how is that in line with historical values with regards to porn industry specifically?
Because the porn industry in the beginning was regarded as a taboo, not only by females, but as by men, as by society as a whole, who has always seen a woman in a specific role in society where she where she did get her right to speech and her right to emancipation. But still, as an important factor in the society, women are not to be perceived only as mere sexual objects, what they are being portrayed as in pornography. Because I would not like to come with specific examples. So, as I have shown to you that pornography passes into a form of repeated viewing of pornography passes into a form of addiction. It is like this that from soft porn we can easily get into hardcore porn, and it is like that in the last 15 years all different subgenres of pornography have been on the rise, and namely child pornography, animal abuse, sadomasochistic sex, and even rape videos. This represents not a threat not only to women who are subject to mutilation, extreme violence, and inhumane treatment, but to society as a whole, which affects their perception upon women. And I am addressing here vulnerable groups as children who are in contact with this kind of pornography, which alters their perception upon the world and upon women. And this is what the feminist movement as a whole does not want to see. No, thank you. There are very few states who have actually imposed a ban on pornography, and it has been demonstrated that once they have imposed this ban, the rates at which pornography has been accessed on the internet have lowered to a quite greater extreme, and the fact that they have imposed these filters have been more effective into protecting children from viewing actually this pornographic material and coming into contact with it at a much earlier age when they are not capable of actually understanding what they are seeing. Likewise, the danger of imitation should not be underestimated. Violent and extreme pornography, which rises from soft porn and which usually makes a lot of women develop a complex of their sexuality with regard compared to that of the women who usually portray themselves into pornographic music. Videos. The danger of imitation should not be underestimated. These types of pornography usually induce men into committing more violent acts against their women, and actually seeing them, continuing to see them as not only sexual objects, but as as objects that do not even have a right to be taken care of. And to conclude, I must emphasize the proportions of spreading pornography, as you are aware of the speed and accessibility of the internet. People should not make an industry where they are going to, we're talking about billions of dollars, in order to, by profiting on the sexuality and actually not the always consent of women. By these, I would like to beg you to propose the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a proposition today who have not only mischaracterized the nature of porn, but have also failed to show us why the feminist movement in particular should seek a ban on porn, why it's good for the feminist movement, why it's in line with the feminist movement's goals. And I'm going to be further showing you in my speech today why, first of all, porn isn't actually that bad. Second of all, why seeking a ban on pornography would be bad for the feminist movement. But overall, if the feminist movement were to succeed in a ban, that it would lead to increased harms to women, as I'll be showing in my positive matter. So, assuming but not conceding that Mike hadn't already proven the illegitimacy of seeking a ban, I'll be showing that even if it was legitimate, the feminist movement would not succeed in fulfilling the third arm of our framework, that of protecting women from harm, and I'll be proving that their seeking it would therefore be unacceptable. So my positive matter will be dealing with the harms accrued to women should they succeed, in terms of firstly the creation of an unregulated market, and secondly reversing the economic emancipation of women. But first, some rebuttal. And the first question we have to ask is it a legitimate choice for women to engage in porn? We would concede the harms to Linda Lovegood, the only example, and the analytical example that side proposition brought us today. There may be one or two women who, for whatever reason, are forced into porn. For psychological damage reasons, or for whatever the reasons, there may be those minority of women. We would still argue that we have to look at the majority of cases. And we would argue that in the majority of cases, it's actually quite a good economic decision for women to be taking, particularly in regulated porn industries like in Holland and like in California, which have norms and standards which protect women. Where, for example, in California, men have to wear condoms when shooting a video because women are protected in the industry, where in Holland, for example, women in the porn industry are paid double that of teachers, and so it's a good economic decision, plus going into a market where they are still protected. We don't think that it's an irrational decision for a woman to take, particularly because of Mike's matter, which went largely unrebutted, about how it is a woman's body, and how a woman, therefore, still has the right to engage in this. Secondly, in terms of the stagnation of the feminist movement, we would argue that they've mischaracterized the movement. The majority of feminists are pro-choice. All of the feminists' previous successful campaigns have been to ensure the choice of women, whether it's to ensure that women have a political choice in terms of who their government is, the right to vote, whether it's in terms of a choice to work and not having to stay at home. That's the major pillar of the feminist movement. We think that banning porn would not be in line with this. But more than that, we would argue that that's why when some in the movement launched an anti-porn campaign in the 70s, it triggered the sex wars. It almost destroyed the feminist movement because they could not agree within the movement on whether or not it was the right decision. But more than that, because people who aren't necessarily feminists but who support the majority of legitimate feminist goals are largely liberals, pro-choice people who were angered by the feminist move in this regard and who abandoned the feminist movement. We need to see some analysis as to why the feminists should seek a ban here. But lastly, in terms of their arguments about it harming women, because I've shown you that it is a legitimate choice and that it would be bad for the feminist movement itself to seek it, even if it wasn't legitimate. So does it harm women? In terms of the industry itself, as I've shown you, the norms and standards exist. It's actually good for women. But more than that, we would argue that if they're trying to show us that the porn industry is bad for women, that women are abused in the industry, they should be arguing for regulation, that the feminist movement should be seeking better protection of women in industries where there is abuse, not seeking an outright ban. We need to see analysis as to why that's the case as well. So now on to my positive matter, and firstly I'm going to be speaking about the creation of an unregulated market. We think that there are two possible outcomes of the motion. Either the feminists fail to achieve a ban and in the process undermine their own movement, as Mike has showed you already, or the feminists achieve a ban, but their success comes at the expense of the very woman they're trying to protect. Why? Because we think that an unregulated market will develop, which will be much worse for women in the industry than the status quo. Why will this market come about? We see that the porn industry is huge. It generates anywhere between $40 billion and $60 billion of annual revenue globally. It's massive and constantly growing. It's also been around for a very long time. Greeks were painting sex on vases in 200 BC, and the modern porn industry has been going since we had the ability to record video. Thus it's clear that demand for porn is massive and that it's an entrenched institution in our society. That means that people want to have it, to buy it, to watch it. Regardless of a ban, demand will continue to exist. The question is, where will supply come from? We see that the largest growing porn industries are in countries like Korea, China, India, and Brazil. That's where the majority of growth in consumption is taking place. Why? Because the number of people in these countries with expendable income is growing, and they can spend that money on porn. Still, though, the majority of production happens in the regulated first world. The point being, though, that even if a ban were successful in the developed world, if the feminists were to achieve their misguided campaign, if it was successful, it wouldn't affect the developing world, for three reasons. Firstly, because governments there simply don't care. They're developing governments. They have more important national issues to think about. Secondly, they don't have the capacity to enforce a ban. Where we look at China, for example, who has the most efficient internet controls in the world, where porn consumption is punishable by death, but where they still have the largest global consumption of porn. People still watch porn. China can't find a way to stop their greasy men from watching it. Thirdly, we see that these countries don't have established feminist movements, unlike the developed world, where the feminist movement has a historical place in society and can put pressure on their government to enforce a ban. So we see that these industries, developing world industries, will grow to fill the gap left by banning Western industries. We've seen this happen in Ukraine, who banned porn in 2007, but where consumption has since doubled today. Because when banned, porn becomes even more of a guilty pleasure. People tend to want it even more because they can't have it. But more than that, because the removal of legal standards and measures, those measures which protected women, means that porn was even cheaper to produce than ever before. Russian companies didn't have to spend money on condoms or on protecting women or on meeting minimum standards and norms anymore. So we see that under their policy, even if they were to succeed, they would actually lead to increased harms to women, more abuse of women, because they would be removing the legal frameworks within the industry. But secondly, in terms of reversing the economic emancipation of women, and I'll be proving here that feminists should be empowering women by supporting the industry, rather than banning the industry. Should you seek a ban, you would first of all be taking away the personal choice that Mike and I have both defended. But more than that, I'll be proving that you take away their economic freedom. Porn is one of the only industries in the world where women are valued even more than men, which is contrary to their mischaracterization of the industry. Women in the United States of America out-earn men 2-to-1 in the porn industry. It's the only industry where that happens. Women worked very hard for this, because it means that they're able to attain financial independence. They're no longer dependent on men, they have agency, they have freedom. That's a pillar of feminism. That's something that feminism supports. We think that therefore feminists should support this industry and actually try to emulate it in other industries. We wish for a world in which the norms and standards in the porn industry would exist in every other profession, where we wouldn't have to worry about other issues. In conclusion, seeking a ban on porn would not further feminist goals of choice and equal opportunity. It would only serve to weaken the movement, and as I've shown you in my speech, a ban on it would actually create even greater harms to women. But more than that, there are more important things for the feminists to be looking at, whether it's increased regulation of porn industries or other issues facing women in society. We don't think they should be using their limited political capital, their limited political power on this misguided campaign, which would only serve to be counterproductive to women. Thank you.
Gentlemen, the reason why the feminist movement should seek a ban on pornography is because women's image is damaged in these movies, because they do suffer from these movies, and because they are obliged to do several awful things that are not always their choice. Two things I'm going to
to speak about in this speech is the choice of women to participate in these movies, and if and about the economical issue the opposition decided to take in this debate. The opposition is stating that women decide by themselves if they want to participate in porn movies, and this is their freedom of expression. But didn't you ask yourselves, why don't they show men's faces in these porn movies? Why all the porn movies are about satisfying men's desire and not women's? Because men are those who are watching pornography, and pornography is created in order to satisfy some not normal desires of men. Women do not watch pornography, and they are often obliged to participate in it. Therefore, it is not always their choice. We brought the example of Linda Lovegood, and this is not the only example where women are obliged to participate. This is one example from thousands where women have to do several dirty and not normal things in order for these movies to be filmed. Also, the opposition is stating that the feminist movement is actually pleading for the freedom of speech, and that the women have the right to control their body and to participate in these movies. But we want to emphasize the fact that participating in these porn movies is actually a radical decision, a position when women don't know what they are going for and are not informed, and they actually don't realize that these porn movies are going to be spread out on the internet and used and in order to damage their image. Also, if maybe there are several women who conscience decide to participate in porn movies, but why does the majority women have to suffer from this minority? Why do all the women in the world have to suffer from this damaging dignity from the porn movies? Several women decide to implement. Speaking about the economic effect, the opposition is stating that a woman who acts in a porn movie receives like $20,000. I don't remember the number, but do you, ladies and gentlemen, think that it is normal to invest more money in pornography than we invest in education? Why does a porn actor have to receive a greater wage than a teacher? And also, we speak about an industry where money don't go to the state, but actually are received by a private institution and several individuals. Therefore, they are not invested in the state's development afterwards. The opposition speaks about the fact that the government has more important issues than pornography. But what is more important than protecting women's rights and also the development of the country? Because as the proposition stated, these porn movies influence the image of women to children, because children's curiosity makes them watch these films that are very easy to find on the internet. You must agree about that. And yes, maybe these violent and hardcore porns are not so easy to find, but a soft porn movie can also conceive an altered image of women in kids' imagination, which is not correct, because children must be taught to see both men and women as equal, and women's dignity and image in a society must not
be altered by some pornographic movies. Also, yes, please.
Bestiality, pedophilia, and exposing children to pornography are all illegal and are all currently banned. So a ban doesn't work.
Yes, maybe they are illegal. We agree. And the opposition spoke about the unregulated market that will be conceived afterwards. But you must agree that the unregulated black market is going to be very expensive, and not everybody will have access to it, as children do have access now, as pornography is legal. Actually, just filtering these internet sites and porn sites is not enough, because everybody has access to it, even underage children. Therefore, pornography should be banned in order not to damage women's dignity and their influence towards children. Pornography does encourage sexism, as we see, because it shows different awful images, and we cannot make abstractions of the violent pornography and just resume our debate to soft porn, as the opposition tried to do. The feminist movement should seek a ban on pornography, because as the proposition demonstrated, porn movies engage the women in some movies that damage their dignity. This being said, I beg you to propose the motion.
Now, we think it's ironic in today's debate that the girls from Moldova want to give feminist movement a goal that, if achieved, would create an unregulated market where the extreme harms they've talked about of women being abused, of women being raped, of the tales of Linda Lovelace, they no longer become the exception to the rule, but they become a status quo. They support rights, women's rights of liberation and choice, but say that when women act on it, they condemn this as being irrational and not being a true woman. They want a world where the minority can't dictate what the majority can and cannot do, but that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying that women are defined based on what the feminist movement views them as, or based on what other people view them as, not based on who they decide to define as themselves. And they support the feminist movement, but undermine their legitimacy within the future. Now, in my rebuttal speech, I'll be looking at what actually is the feminist movement and showing you how seeking a ban is undermining their own ideals, not in line with their movement that we also want to protect. And then I'll be looking at how this is actually not in the best interests of the feminist movement. So when the real issues of women's rights come up, when the real issues they've outlined, the feminist movement, if they were to seek a ban, would be less able to effectively deal with them. So my first one, the ideals of feminism, and showing you how it's not in their mandate to look for a ban such as this. Now, what are the ideals of feminism? It's equality. They've listed their achievements. These achievements have been getting rights. They've been getting choice. That they don't have to be in the workplace, but they have the option to be in the workplace. They don't have to no longer be confined in their home. They define their future. They define their role, not anyone else. That's been the goals of feminism. And when we look at the nature of pornography, we think that's something that upholds this idea of choice, that women can choose what is acceptable for them as an individual. And we think with this idea of morally and ethically porn is wrong, we think there's no universal consensus about this, especially within the feminist movement. We have pro-choice, pro-sex feminism within there. If it was really supposed to be reflecting the ideals of feminism, we're seeing a very strong move towards pro-porn feminism. They even have awards for it within Toronto every year. We think that a lot of feminist movement, if you're supposed to be reflecting them, they like porn, and even if they don't like it, they respect other people's right to enjoy it. That's how we actually are reflecting most feminism. And we think that you don't judge based on what the majority or minority thinks. And even if we did, that a lot of people buy into the concept of pornography. 1 out of 3 women like it, 3 out of 4 men. We think a lot of people like this. Why do we undermine their choice? If those are the women you want to protect, they choose pornography, why do you want to limit their choice? And even if we think we respect the choice and we don't dictate what other people need to view it as. Now they brought this idea of these tangible harms, which I'll show you, actually don't exist to the extent they're talking about. Now they brought up the idea of abuse and violence. Now we also want to stop that. We simply believe that seeking a ban will not protect us. This is already illegal. There's no way of making it more illegal by trying to achieve any sort of ban. You're not combating this in any way. It's not going to fix those problems and we actually, I'll be showing you later, actually do. But they brought up this idea of sex addicts and mixed perception that women are objects. Now I've shown you that 3 out of 4 men watch pornography, but 3 out of 4 men do not have this sort of perception of women as being objects, do not go home and abuse their wives, and we think the minority that would result negatively and would hurt their wives or anyone in question, we think those are the ones that first of all have such a high demand they're going to access porn regardless of whether or not it was banned, and on a second level, we think those are the minority that shouldn't dictate what all those other people who watch softcore porn and enjoy it and then have no sort of these bad effects afterward. And we think that a lot of the times, the places that had the best women's rights, the best movements, have been in places that also have very strong pornography industries. We see this in California, where the birthplace of the feminist movement, but also the main place where pornography exists. And a lot of the nations that actually have bans on pornography, we're looking at places like Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Iran, those are a lot of the places that also oppress women. And a lot of the time, having porn industries is a reflection of the fact that women are emancipated because they're choosing to buy into this. They had that choice. We want to respect it. And we think these these porn addiction that you've talked about, we think that's a tiny minority that would exist anyways. And we simply believe that you don't limit this choice of and also the multi-billion-dollar industry just because of a small problem. And I've shown you these people would do so anyways. You're in no way stopping them. You're just funneling them from legal good porn that is regulated, and you're pushing them towards worse. That's only going to exacerbate their problems of being mentally unstable and all those problems you've talked about. With the idea of violence and abuse, we can see that's also bad. We also want to battle. But we simply believe the solution is not seeking a ban. We think Linda Lovelace, that is a tragedy. But we think that it's already illegal. Seeking a ban won't have any change. And the feminist movement should only try to seek to achieve something if that is achieved, it leads to the better protection of women. We don't think that is achieved. We ask you to justify this. We think it's actually in a lot of cases very good. We think that this outlines their choice. We think that it leads them to be economically emancipated. We think that this allows for the sexual freedom within them. And we simply believe that the idea that just because not a woman like it, just because it's not the ideal, doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to go into it. Being a waitress is not ideal, but we still respect people have the choice to go in there. Just because it's not their first place, I'll take you in a second. Why should we ban it? Yes?
Are waitresses being raped at their workplace?
Oh, first of all, no, they're not, but we simply believe not all people who work in porn are being raped in the workplace either. And the small exception where women are being raped, we want to combat that. We're providing you a way to. I'll deal with that in a second. So I've shown you why this isn't a violation of their principles and why, in fact, it is good for their principles of choice, of protecting women, and seeking a ban either wouldn't work, and if it did work, would actually undermine the very women we want to protect in today's debate. So I'll be showing you that it's not even in the best interest of the feminist movement. In the real cases of abuse that were in today's debate, I'll be showing you that they're now going to be less capable of dealing with this. Now we want them to have legitimacy. We want them to combat the terrible oppression and manipulation you've already outlined. That means we need to maximize the support they can have in today's debate. We don't want them to make unnecessary enemies that are going to make it even harder to combat the problems that you've already expressed in today's debate. Now I'll show you how you're actually hurting the movement. We think they lose buy-in not only from men who watch it, but also women who either watch it, take part in it, but also respect the choice of women to be in it. The idea that not all women like abortion would have one themselves, but they respect other women's rights to possibly achieve so. We think it pushes them, they lose the support of these liberals that would fund them, and pushes them towards conservative religion that actually would seek a ban on pornography, but also believe that women should stay at home and stick into this confined box. We don't want to push them towards people that undermine the very ideals of feminism. We think it creates a strong anti-pornography lobby. The idea that the porn industry, they have lots of money and can completely crush the feminist movement in their limited funds, but also we're giving them the moral high ground because they're saying, we're protecting women's choice, we're looking out for women, your feminist movement has abandoned you. We think it splinters their unity so they can no longer accomplish your goals they've talked about. And also the vulnerable women, prostitutes, sex workers, they feel excluded from the sisterhood of feminism because they're now being told that what they do for a living is not good for them. So ladies and gentlemen, that means we're taking the feminist movement, what Moldova is doing, taking the feminist movement and putting them in a position where they can't protect people's rights and where they violate their own principles. We want to protect feminists. That's what we're doing. Thank you.
Great thinkers of the past have asked the question, what do women want? Sigmund Freud, Mel Gibson, Team South Africa brings you the answer. What women want is, first of all, choice and opportunity. Secondly, they want safety from explicit harms. And thirdly, they want the feminist movement to continue to exist in the future so that if they should need it, they are there to protect them. And it is only when acting would achieve these three goals that the feminist movement should act. The feminist movement being a specific social movement with their own concerns. That's the framework South Africa posed on this debate in the first minute of my speech. That's the framework we've constantly measured our success in this debate, and it's on this framework that we won. So on the first pillar of the framework, choice and opportunity. What we need to see is that there was a concession from Team Moldova that approximately 99% of women in porn are expressing illegitimate choice. They are the ones who are rational. They are the ones who feel that it is a free expression of their own sexual identity. They are the ones that have weighed up the economic reality that they're going to be paid twice as much for expressing their sexual identity on camera than they will in most other industries. It's a legitimate, rational choice for these people. This is particularly important when we recognize the fact that the sexual emancipation and choice for control of your own body for women is one of the key tenets of the feminist movement. They therefore need a very good reason to be infringing on the rights of the vast majority of women. When we look at this web, and this is the web Moldova tried to impose on the debate, was that 1% who are harmed. Do the infringements on their rights under the status quo weigh up the harms of a ban? And no, they don't. Because first of all, a tiny minority is a tiny minority. They don't outweigh what is best for the majority. We gave you evidence as to the fact that they're a tiny minority, because there's only been one reported case. Because there's a trade union for sex workers in South California. Because there are societal systems and mechanisms which ensure that they are protected. Secondly, those harms which do exist, that Moldova highlighted, are mostly illegal anyway, so a ban doesn't work. Thirdly, where they do still continue to exist is an argument for greater regulation, not a ban on the porn industry. Indeed, Saul showed you in his second speech that a ban would propagate these harms, would make them more prevalent, and remove from women the legal recourse they currently have in order to combat these harms. So we don't protect women from explicit harms. South Africa has won the first two arms of our criteria framework in this debate. What we need to see then is that there was a third act, or a second actor in this debate, which was completely unengaged with by Moldova. We think that the motion very specifically asked both teams today to take this debate from the point of view of the feminist movement. And South Africa provided a substantive case which was geared along the lines of what is best for the feminist movement. Does such an action, such as a ban on pornography, meet our third criteria? does it strengthen and propagate the feminist movement in the future? Now, we've won this because of our analysis on multiple levels. First of all, we accurately characterize the feminist movement as primarily being pro-choice. Indeed, the only loudly anti-porn feminist, Robert Jensen, is a man who is an evangelical in Texas. It's only a minority of feminists who are anti-pornography. Secondly, we proved to you that seeking a ban would split the feminist movement, robbing them of momentum just as it did in the 80s. Thirdly, we proved to you that it would polarize society against them in terms of the majority of liberals, which Saul highlighted, and normal men and women in everyday society, which is in my speech. Thirdly, we established that it would empower evangelicals and people who are opposed to the feminist movement. I have an answer for Sigmund Freud. I have an answer for Mel Gibson. What women want is not a ban on the porn industry. What women want is for feminists to maintain their historical stance on being pro-choice for all people. Thank you.
In an ideal world, there would have never been a need for a feminist movement to exist. Unless this feminist movement has arisen, it means that it has certain principles upon which it has based its ideology. And first of all, we would like to say that where once the opposition has always accused the proposition of bringing not enough evidence and about not thinking about women, and actually we were talking about the fact that where one's rights end, there where somebody else's rights begin. And that was what I spoke about in my speech, and that was developed by my third speaker about the fact that a minority of women who decide to express their sexuality in a certain way influences the perception of you upon the majority of women, and which actually has to suffer in the future. The feminist movement has never been a pro-porn movement, because if it would have been like that from the start, it would have never sought to achieve equity between men and women, which is actually not the case in porn movies. We're not talking about men and women having the same status when performing in these movies, and we're talking about discrimination and objectification of women. The core of the problem has actually been neglected by the opposition. Now we are talking about women, which are both the actors of these movies, and they have stated potential consumers, and they have only looked at the side of men who consume pornography, and of large masses who are in demand of something that is now yet banned and still a taboo as a reminiscence from foreign generations. Whilst the proposition team has proved to you that actually we have to take into consideration the fact that pornography is not a form of entertainment like any other, and that the actors who are actually performing it and enforcing it are usually dehumanized, are subject to inhumane treatment, and Linda Lovelace was actually an example to prove that there are much more other people talking about and trying to escape the porn industry and then the prostitution industry, because this is actually something that women do not want to be engaged in, and we thought the proposition would understand that we are not limiting just to a simple example, we have the outrage to be cited and to be publicized in press. Second of all, we are also talking about the influence upon the state, whose citizens have an altered perception upon women, and actually this has third-party consequences upon the perception of women and family in general in the state. And we're talking about the influence upon the society, and especially upon the younger layers, on the unprepared layers, which are children, and which have not actually been tackled so very well by the opposition. Have stated that there already exists a ban. Well, where there already exists a ban, this is only a limited ban, a limited infringement, and actually it is very easy to suppress. And that is why we're actually confronting right now with such a widespread of pornography. We need to ban it effectively in order for the problem to be resolved. I am also about the fact that the feminist movement had a certain type of history, and it is normal that within any kind of movement there be different types of orientations. But what we're talking about is what the majority of the feminists wanted, even those who are now pro-porn feminists. The feminists always wanted to achieve female dignity and equality of rights between women and men. But we can never be talking about equity of rights between between women who are usually harassed and not always subject to what they always want. We're talking about movies who portray only male arousal fantasies and never focus upon women's desires. And we are also state and is actually more encouraged just for the economical benefit and is actually neglecting the moral principles it violates and is actually encouraged and promoted. For the reasons we have exposed and calling upon your sense of morality when it comes to the image of women, which has long been fought for, we beg you to propose the motion.